بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the 19th lesson of this blessed book. And we stopped last time at the janazah prayer, the funeral prayer. And it is part of Islam to honor a person who dies. So when a Muslim dies, it is a catastrophe. It is something that is unpleasant to depart a loved one. And those who get such a calamity, Islam gives them the right to mourn for 3 days and 3 nights. And mourning in Islam is not to wear perfumes, not to celebrate, not to wear new clothes, rather to express your sadness and grief over the person who died, unless he is a husband. So the wife is the only one who is exempted from mourning only for 3 days and nights, for she is obliged to mourn for 4 months and 10 days. So when a Muslim dies, there are a number of things to be done. As we are discussing the book of prayer, we are only concerned with the prayer itself. But generally speaking, when a person is on his dying bed, there are a number of etiquettes that should be followed, such as when visiting him, we should remind him of Allah Azza wa Jal in a very diplomatic way and not in an intimidating way. So a person on his dying bed, we should remind him of Jannah, of Allah's forgiveness, give him the glad tidings of anyone who dies after a long battle with illness or disease, how he will die with no sins on him at all. Make him hopeful. And at the same time, remind him to repent to Allah Azza wa Jal. Remind him to give back anything that he took unlawfully. Debts, money that he invested or someone invested with him and he's not returning back. Remind him of the need to write a will so that he would set things straight after his death, and whether he wants to give 1/3 or less of his wealth to charity or to relatives who are not heirs, who are not inheriting, etc. And above all, it is important that he is reminded with the kalima, which is La ilaha illallah, to be his last words. And those who are on their dying bed most likely would not be able to understand or comprehend a lot of what you say. So the scholars say, if a person is capable of understanding, you tell him, say La ilaha illallah, but do not repeat it a number of times so that you don't bore him to death, literally, because he is in a situation where he is about to die. When you keep on repeating La ilaha illallah, say La ilaha illallah, and he says it and you repeat it again, he would most likely be agitated, and shaitan will utilize this moment and say, don't say la ilaha illallah so many times to me. I've said it, khalas, it's enough. Rather, just say it once, and as long as he did not speak anything else, this is sufficient. But if he said la ilaha illallah, and then after 5-10 minutes he said, my throat is dry, give me some water. So you bring him the water and you say la ilaha illallah, so that he would hear you and say it again, and that would be his last word. Whoever ends his life and faces death while la ilaha illallah is the last word that he says, the Prophet ﷺ told us that he will go to Jannah. He will go to paradise. So it's a great deal indeed. The textbook says among the things that are recommended is to place a dying person so as to face the Qibla. And this was mentioned in the books of fiqh by some schools of fiqh, but this is weak. It is not authentic. The hadith is not authentic. And we know that the hadith where Mother Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, tells us about how the Prophet ﷺ last moments were, and how he was putting her head or his head on her chest, lying down, and he passed away in that position. She never mentioned that she made him face the Qibla or he asked her to face the Qibla. So this is not authentic. So what is the ruling on Salatul Janazah, the funeral prayer? The most authentic opinion is that it is a communal obligation. It's a collective duty. This means that if one person in the whole community takes care of washing the deceased, perfuming him, shrouding him, carrying him to be prayed over, and one or two offer the funeral prayer, and they take him to the graveyard and put him in his grave and bury him, then this is sufficient. But if none of the Muslim community does this, all of them will be sinful on the Day of Judgment. So one person is sufficient. And the evidence is that the Prophet ﷺ said, pray for your brother. Sallu ala akhikum. Pray upon or over your brother who had died. And not all of them did this. Rather, a handful of people took care of it, which means that that was sufficient and enough. What are the conditions to offer such a prayer? And before we move on to this section, I am shocked when I pray in Mecca or Medina, and immediately after the Fard prayer, the Imam offers the funeral prayer. A lot of the brothers, especially from the subcontinent, unfortunately again, from India, from Pakistan, are more focused on praying their Sunnah prayers rather than following the Imam in praying the funeral prayer. Now, what they had done is wrong, because the Sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ is to make dhikr after Fard prayer. And after you dhikr, you can offer the Sunnah prayer. That is, if you're residing. But if you're a traveler for Umrah, it is not Sunnah to pray the Maghrib, the Isha, and the Dhuhr Sunnah prayers, because a traveler skips those like the Prophet ﷺ used to skip them. Thirdly, the funeral prayer has huge amount of reward that are far greater than the voluntary prayers. Not only that, voluntary prayers, you can pray them after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour after the fard prayer. No problem, as long as the time of that particular prayer is still valid, you can pray the voluntary prayer anytime you wish. But the funeral prayer is there in front of you. If you miss it now, you're not going to be able to pray it. And do you know what is the reward? The Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, whoever prays the funeral prayer, he will be awarded a qirat. And whoever follows a funeral until it is buried in the cemetery, he will be rewarded 2 qirat. So the companion said, what is a qirat? The Prophet ﷺ said, the equivalent to Mount Uhud of good deeds. Can you imagine how big Mount Uhud is? And you get this easy reward in less than 5 minutes when you offer the funeral prayer. And yet people are so uninterested. As for the deceased, the Prophet said, whenever 100 Muslim offer the funeral prayer over a dead Muslim, they will intercede, meaning Allah will accept their prayer and intercession, and Allah will forgive him. And Allah Azza wa Jal reduced the number from 100 Muslims to 40 Muslims, and said that if 40 Muslims offer the funeral prayer, Allah will accept their intercession. So definitely no Muslim in his right mind would miss such a great prayer. What are the conditions? Well, it's the same conditions as normal salat, such as intention, being an adult, you have to face the qibla, you have to cover your awrah, you have to be in the state of wudu, you have to avoid any impurity on your clothes or body, and you as a worshipper should be Muslim, and the deceased must be as well Muslim. So a non-Muslim cannot pray funeral prayer because he's not Muslim, and Muslims cannot offer funeral prayer to non-Muslims. And there is another condition, but mentioned in the textbook, but this is not a strong one, which is that the presence of the body of the deceased. Yes, this is usually a condition, but there is also what is known as Salatu al-Ghaib, the prayer of the absentee. And this is when the corpse of a Muslim is not in front of us, not present, or not in the country itself. And this is something that is disputed upon, but to mention it in the conditions can be accepted, though it is not the most authentic. Essentials. Those who are offering funeral prayer, it is essential for them to do that while standing up, because as mentioned in the pillars of prayer, which we mentioned way back in the beginning, we said al-qiyamu ma'al-qudrah, to stand up when a person is able to do so. So likewise with the funeral prayer, the janazah, salatul janazah, you must stand up and offer it. You also must know that it consists of 4 takbir as minimum. These are pillars. You have to say Allahu Akbar 4 times. And why do we say minimum? Because there are narrations that take them up to 9 takbir. And maybe we will discuss this later on, inshallah. Among the pillars is reciting the Fatiha. And this is an issue of dispute among scholars. The Hanafi school of thought and the Maliki school of thought, they say that it is not part of the prayer to recite it. The Hanbali and the Shafi'i say, well, it is a must to recite the Fatiha. Why do they differ? Maybe because they don't have enough evidences to prove that this is a pillar, or they did not receive such evidences. As for the Hanbali school of thought, the Prophet ﷺ called it salat. And he said, whoever offers prayer over a deceased corpse. So, describing it as salat and knowing from his sunnah that Fatiha is a pillar of the salat and that there is no salat for someone who does not recite Ummul Kitab, the Fatiha. This indicates that it's a pillar. Also, they quote the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, when he offered the funeral prayer once, leading his companions, and he recited loudly to teach them, and he recited the Fatiha in it. So these evidences and many more all support those who say that it is a pillar of the salat. Then we have the salutation. So it is a must to offer the salutation upon the Prophet ﷺ. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammadin kama sallayta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. And we will come to discuss this later in the format and how to pray the Salat al-Janazah. And finally, or before the final point, is a supplication for the deceased, because this prayer is to intercede for the deceased. So you have to ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive him, to pardon him, to erase his sins, with a set of dua that the Prophet used to say, alayhi salatu wassalam. And finally, concluding the prayer, like every single other prayer, with salam. As we know that to begin a prayer you need to have takbir, takbiratul ihram, and to conclude your prayers you have to finish it with salam. And here we have only one salam to the right. What is recommended in offering Salatul Janazah? Part of the Sunnah is to raise your hand whenever you say Allahu Akbar. So in 4 takbirs, you say Allahu Akbar, you recite the Fatiha. Allahu Akbar, you recite the salutation, and so on. So this is part of what is recommended. Secondly, before you recite the Fatiha, you say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and you recite it. This is recommended. It's not mandatory. Thirdly is that you do everything in the salat other than the takbir silently. And this is a sunnah. But you may go against the sunnah if needed when teaching people how to pray. If I go to a place or a country that they have no idea of this salat, and I want to pray over a Muslim who had died and they're behind me. So there's no problem in illustrating that through reciting loudly the Fatiha, the salutation, the dua, and the rest of the prayers loudly, so that they can learn and understand what am I doing or saying. And finally, it is recommended to ask Allah Azza wa Jal to include us and the Muslims in the supplication. Allahumma la tahrimna ajrahum wa la taftinna ba'dahum waghfir lana wa lahum. This is part of the Sunnah. O Allah, do not deprive us from the reward, and do not test us with what we cannot bear, and have forgiveness for us and for them. But usually the rest, or the vast majority of dua, is devoted to making dua for the sake and for the interest of the deceased. Time. So when should we offer this prayer? This prayer is to be offered only after the deceased corpse has been prepared, meaning that we give the deceased a full ghusl. And this would come inshallah later on in the book of Janaiz. We give him a full ghusl in a specific format, and then we perfume him, shroud him in 3 white pieces of cloth, and if it's a girl, if it's a female, we do that in 5 pieces of cloth, and then we perfume the shrouds again, and then we carry the funeral to a place where Muslims are there and offer the prayer of the janazah, not before. So if a person just died and he's lying on his bed covered up, we don't come and pray janazah. The time of it is after it's been washed and shrouded. The importance, we've mentioned that earlier, and it's a great reward that people should not mess with. How is it done? First of all, when a corpse is brought to the masjid, and this is where usually nowadays Muslims pray, but it can be prayed anywhere else. So if there's a hole outside of the masjid, or there's a hole in the cemetery itself, and they pray janazah there's no problem in that. Bearing in mind that it is not permissible to offer prayers in a cemetery, in a graveyard, excluding the funeral prayer, because it has no bowing and no prostration in it. So where does the imam stand? When they bring the funeral, they place the funeral in the qibla, with the head to the right of the worshippers, this is the qibla, and his feet to the left. The sunnah, if it is a man, that a person or the imam stands next to the head of the deceased. So if it's a man, I'm covering the head area and people are behind me. If it's a woman, I should move and stand in the middle of the body of the deceased, next to her stomach and chest. So I would cover that area with my body. This is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. I cannot give any justification or why. This is something we were not told about the wisdom behind it. So everybody else stands behind. They have to try to make as many rows as possible, not necessarily filling the gaps or filling the rows. Sometimes in big masjids, you find that one row is sufficient. But when it comes to funeral prayer, this one row is divided into like 6 or 7 rows made of 10, 15 men, so that you have many rows standing behind one another, and this is greater for the reward of the deceased. Then the Imam says the takbir, Allahu Akbar, places his right hand over his left on his chest, and he recites A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Al-Fatiha. Then he says غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَالضَّالِّينَ Ameen. It is recommended to recite a surah afterwards, because in the hadith of Ibn Abbas, when he recited loudly to teach his companions, he read the Fatiha and the surah. But if you don't recite a surah, there's no problem in that. Then you raise your hands again, twice, second time, Allahu Akbar, and you recite the salutation, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad. Then after you finish, you raise your hand for the third time, Allahu Akbar, and you raise it to the level of your shoulder and your ears. Some people do it lazy, like Allahu Akbar, and this is not right way of doing it. You say Allahu Akbar, and you make dua, Allahumma ghfir li mayyitina, hadirina wa ghaibina, صغيرنا وكبيرنا ذكرنا وأنثانا اللهم اغفر لهم وارحمهم وعافهم. You start to read the dua, which has many variations to it. It has beautiful words that the Prophet ﷺ taught us, and it all revolves around forgiveness, expansion of the grave, filling it with light, substituting the deceased with a family better than his family, and grant his family the patience over their loss, washing him with cold water and washing his sins, that is, and making him as far as the east and west from his sins, etc. So all of these beautiful du'as, you'll find it listed here, that would probably be very beneficial if you memorize them in Arabic, because they have so much beautiful meanings to it and a lot of value behind it. Now, we have done the necessary. After that, you say Allahu Akbar for the 4th time. You give a little pause and you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That's it. It's finished. Now there are variations. As I stated, the minimum is 4 takbir, but the maximum is 10. The maximum is 9. So there are a hadith that companions, like Ali, for example, Ibn Abi Talib, led the prayer once and he offered 7 takbir. And Abdullah ibn Zubair offered it once and offered 9 takbir. May Allah be pleased with them all. So the scholars said that all of these variations are accepted, though the most strongest of them all is the hadith of 4 takbir, because this is what the Prophet had done alayhi salatu wassalam when the Najashi, the Abyssinian king, died. The Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam told his companions that today your brother An-Najashi has died, let's go and pray funeral prayer. And he made them stand in rows and he offered 4 takbir and concluded it with salam. So this is the most authentic opinion. Let me rephrase that. This is the most authentic hadith where it states that the Prophet offered it alayhi salatu wasalam as 4 takbir for the janazah. But if other schools of thought or other imams add more, there's no problem in following that. In regards to the issue of Salatul Ghaib, the scholars have differed whether it is permissible indefinitely to offer funeral prayer to whomever had died and we were not able to witness his janazah or not. So sometimes you go to a masjid and one of the brothers says, Akhi, he goes to the imam and says, Akhi, my uncle died in the UK and he was a dear uncle to me and I'd like to pray Salatul Ghaib. So after Isha prayer, the imam says, we will offer Salatul Ghaib for so and so. And tomorrow Fajr, another one says, well, my brother died in Egypt. And Dhuhr prayer, another one says, my uncle died in Syria. And what is this? In the masjid, we have like 1,000 people praying every single fard. And definitely one of them must have lost a loved one. So is this part of the Sunnah to do this? The answer is no. There are so many people who had died and the Prophet did not offer ﷺ funeral prayer for their souls because they were in other countries. So why did the Prophet offer it ﷺ over the Abyssinian king? Scholars said because he was the only Muslim and there were no Muslims around him to offer it. But if a Muslim dies in a country where the community takes care of washing him, shrouding him, offering funeral prayer on him and burying him, in this case it is not legitimate for us to offer such a prayer. Now if you were someone who was traveling and came back and a loved one, a relative who had died last week was already buried, can I go to his grave and offer it? The answer is yes. Scholars say you have up to 1 month to go and offer such a prayer. There's no problem, inshallah. What about offering funeral prayer a number of times? There's no problem. We've washed, shrouded our deceased in our house and now he is at the side of the room waiting for the ambulance to come and pick him up to go to the masjid. Women come and pray, no problem. Men offer funeral prayer on their own, no problem. We take him to the masjid. After Fard Salat, we offer funeral prayer in congregation. Those who prayed home can pray again. We take him to the cemetery and there were latecomers who did not offer it. So before the burial, they place it and they pray funeral prayer and we join them. So this is our third time, no problem. It's a dua, it's a prayer, it's a good thing to offer. There's no problem in that, inshallah. Okay, what about when a woman has a miscarriage, not abortion, but a miscarriage? Should we offer funeral prayer on that or not? Well, it's an issue of dispute. The most authentic opinion is that only if the miscarriage was 120 days old or more. So if a woman was pregnant for 4 months, we know the hadith that states that the angel comes and blows and breathes in the soul when the fetus is 120 days old. Now it's a human being. So if the miscarriage takes place after this period, then it's a human being. So it is washed, shrouded, and offered prayer on him. Before that, no, it's a piece of flesh that has no soul, so it is not to be followed, such a procedure when burying it nor praying on it, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So we conclude our session with this, and we move on to the questions we have. Let me first okay, so we have questions from last time. I have like 14 of them or 13 of them, so let's see if the time is sufficient to answer them, inshallah. Gul says, please advise, as smoking haram in Islam, but not clear whether a woman should marry a guy who is a smoker. First of all, smoking is a sin without any doubt. It is harmful, it is waste of money, it is repulsive to smell someone who smokes. His breath is awful, his fingers are also smelly, so many bad things. But is this a legitimate excuse to reject a proposal? This depends on a number of factors. Number one, whether that person is adamant in smoking, he's not shy of doing it in public, he doesn't care what people say. This guy is an open sinner. He's an openly sinner. He doesn't care about what people say. And definitely this attitude is not a positive attitude in a man. Yes, we're all sinful. We all have our shortcomings. I have my own sins, but I do not go around and brag about them. It's something that I'm ashamed of. I try to conceal to the best of my ability. But to go openly and commit this sin, even if it's a minor sin, and not be shameful for doing it, this is not a very positive thing. If you are a practicing woman, definitely this is not a person that suits you. But remember that this is not the only sin. Shaving is a sin. So if a person who is clean shaven approaches and proposes, would it be a good thing to reject him or not? This depends on how religious you are. This depends how old you are. This depends on the other good characteristics in him, which may help him to change. If he's kind, loving, caring, financially stable, offers prayers in the masjids, loves the deen, loves the Qur'an, the Sunnah, is enthusiastic, but he has this one particular shortcoming. Then you can evaluate and say, yeah, there's so many good things in him, and hopefully with some diplomatic attempts, he will inshallah be more cooperative in leaving it, etc. Maybe it would be a good thing to consider. Fatima, how to perform wudu, ghusl, with a bandage or plaster over the wound or on our body? Scholars say that I have to ensure that the water reaches the area in my wudu process. So I have to wash my hands and arms. If I have a cut here and I have a plaster, either I can remove the plaster and wash what's underneath it without any harm, then this is a must. Or if I remove the plaster and wash what's underneath, the healing process would be hindered and delayed, or there will be more harm to the wound. In this case, it is prohibited to expose it. Leave the plaster where it is. When you perform wudu, if it's water resistant, then wash your hands and the plaster itself from outside and continue to do wudu without any problem. This is the same whether you have a plaster or a bandage or you have a cast. So let's assume my arm is broken from here till here. I perform normal wudu. When I come to the cast, I just wipe over it. I don't wash it. I just wipe over it. This is sufficient. If I cannot wipe over it, let's assume it's exposed and I can't have bandages on it. It's badly burnt and I cannot touch it or wipe over it. In this case, then try your level best to perform wudu, excluding that exposed area, and afterwards perform tayammum for that area which you were unable to wipe over. But if there's a bandage, then this has no need for that, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Rayyan says, if someone has a riba-based mortgage which will take years to pay off, does he need to pay the mortgage off first before going for Hajj? The answer is yes. Would you like to die while having a debt on you? Because we've stated earlier, if you remember, that the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, all the sins of a martyr are erased except his debts. So, if you don't perform Hajj till you die, on the Day of Judgment, whenever you're asked why, you would say, I didn't have any savings. All the money that I had, I used to pay off my debt. Then you will not be accountable. Because Allah Azza wa Jal made it a condition that Hajj is mandatory upon those who are capable physically and financially, and you're not capable financially. There is a possibility that you may say, but Sheikh, I have savings. In this case, we would tell you, go and pay off the mortgage with the savings you have, so that you would reduce the amount and the time limit or time span. And I'm assuming that your mortgage is halal. If it is riba based, then this is one of the 7 major sins in Islam. And you have definitely a serious problem to take care of. Okay. Masuma Maqsood Islam says, can we give zakat for building masjid? As in the US here, our masjids ask for it? The answer is no. In Ayah 60, chapter 9, Allah Azza wa Jal listed 8 categories of recipients of zakat money. And the scholars say that orphanages, schools, madrasas, masjids are all not included. And fi sabilillah is referring to jihad, not to any type of good deeds or charity. Therefore, what the brothers in US is not correct among so many things they say over there. Isra Hassan says, is it true you get more reward if you delay Isha prayer? The answer is yes. As long as you're doing it on your own, there's no hardship on the congregation. The answer is yes. It was reported that the Prophet ﷺ delayed Isha once till the children in the masjid slept, and the men, their chins used to touch their chests due to doziness. So Umar knocked the door on the Prophet ﷺ and said, O Prophet of Allah, the people have slept. So the Prophet came and said, by Allah, you are the only people on earth praying it at this time and waiting for it. And had I not feared burdening my ummah, I would have made its time this time. And that was nearly the third of the night, which means that almost 4 hours, maybe more, after sunset. So this is the time for Isha, which is greatly rewarded than the normal time, but due to people's needs and activities, this is not practical in cities and towns. But for women praying home, if they can ensure not to delay it after midnight and forget it, then yes, this is highly recommended. Isra again says, does the body of the deceased woman also get funeral prayer on her? The answer is definitely. A Muslim woman is like a Muslim man. She must be washed, shrouded, and offered funeral prayer. Then she goes on saying, if she has no relatives to wash her, pray on her, well, the community is obliged to do this. The women in the community must do this. Then she says, if her body does not get washed, prayed on, does it affect her soul or body? No, it does not. It does not, because it is the sin not of the deceased, but rather of the community as a whole, as I've mentioned before. Juwayriya says, in choosing a spouse, which is the best option to choose for a female? 1, he's stronger than her in deen, but not financially capable. 2, he's financially capable, but with lesser knowledge in the deen compared to the lady. Please note that the lady is not financially capable again too, because she lost her money and job in her previous marriage. Well, this is not something easy to give a straightforward answer. If a person is financially settled and capable, but his knowledge is not as strong as his wife, this doesn't mean anything. Knowledge does not mean anything extra in a marriage. This is a marriage, not an academic institution or university. You're getting married. You're not going there for a degree. So what counts is not his knowledge, but rather his religious practicing. If he is religiously practicing, he prays on time, he doesn't do sins, he is a good Muslim. So if he's financially capable, I would definitely ask you to accept him. If a person is a great student of knowledge, a scholar, an imam, that's good, that's great. But if he's not financially capable, then what would I do with his Islamic knowledge? I would ask him, instead of putting food on the table, to give me a lecture every single day. It's not logical. Yes, it's good to have someone who is knowledgeable than someone who's not. But at the end of the day, you have a marriage to cater for, children to bring up, and without being financially capable, life would not be that easy for both of you. So again, the answer has to do with a number of ins and outs, and this differs from one person to the other. Rufayda says, what is the difference between Salatul Duha and Salatul Ishraq? Salatul Ishraq, there is an authentic hadith which some scholars doubt, where the Prophet says, alayhi salatu wasalam, whoever prays Fajr in congregation, meaning that he's in the masjid, and remains seated remembering Allah Azza wa Jal until the sun rises. Then he prays 2 rak'ahs. These are called 2 rak'ah of Ishraq. Ishraq, by the way, means sunrise. Allah will reward him as if he performed Umrah and Hajj complete. So, scholars authenticate this hadith. Other scholars doubt it and say, no, it is not authentic. Either way, it is a proven fact that the Prophet ﷺ used to stay in the masjid until sunrise. Now, the companions used to do this. Female companions as well used to do this. The Prophet ﷺ entered once upon Mother Zainab bin Jahsh, if I'm not mistaken, or Juwayriyah bint al-Harith. I'm forgetting, I'm getting old. And he came after the sun had risen. So he left her when she was sitting, remembering Allah, came after the sun had risen. She was still remembering Allah Azza wa Jal, and he said to her, I said 4 phrases that are equivalent with all what you had said. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that even the women companions used to sit where they had prayed Fajr and remembering Allah until the sun rises. So this is a great sunnah. Whether the hadith is authentic or not, this is an issue of dispute. I personally believe it's authentic. Now, this is called Salatul Ishraq, which falls under the umbrella of Salatul Duha, because Duha prayer begins from 10 minutes to 15 after the sun rises until 10 minutes before the adhan of Dhuhr. But Ishraq prayer has more conditions added to it, such as it has to be done in the masjid, you must not leave the masjid, and you must engage in dhikr, not in chit-chatting. So they are of the same species, but of a different category. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Alisa says, if in Jeddah Dhuhr is at 12:37 and I pray it at 1 or 2 p.m., is it permissible while knowing that Asr is 3:55? No problem. You can even pray it until it is almost 3:30. There's no problem. Dhuhr's time is quite long. Whether you pray it in the beginning or at the end, you're praying it on time. But it is always best to pray at the beginning of time, unless it is Isha or unless it is Dhuhr and you're praying it in the masjid and it is the peak of summer. These are the 2 times where delaying the prayer is better than praying it at the very beginning. Najmul Haq says, is it right or wrong if I pray Salat of Eid alone? We mentioned this Najm last Monday, and we said that the majority of scholars say that this is permissible. Whomever misses the Eid prayer can pray it alone at home, but Imam Abu Hanifa and also Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen as well say that this is not possible, because this salat was made initially to be prayed in congregation as a ritual of Islam. So praying it alone home defies this purpose, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Nasser says, is it necessary to wait for the adhan before praying Tahiyyatul Masjid, for example on a Friday? No. The moment you enter, you may offer the tahiyyah so that you can sit down, the 2 rak'ahs, so that you can sit down. However, if this is any other salat, let's say I come to the masjid on Dhuhr time and the moment I enter the masjid, the adhan is being called. Should I wait until the adhan is over, or should I pray 2 rak'ahs? The answer is no. Wait, because you are hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. You're repeating behind the mu'adhin, and then you're saying the prescribed dua, and then you're offering the 2 rak'ahs of Tahiyyat al-Masjid. It's a win-win. Except when you come to the masjid late on a Friday, and the Imam has entered and said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and sat down, and the mu'adhin is giving the adhan, and you enter the masjid. Here, I would advise you to start immediately with your 2 rak'ah. Why, Sheikh? Because listening to the Imam is more rewarding than listening to the adhan and repeating behind it. So now you have to pray 2 rak'ahs quickly, sit down and anticipate the khutbah, the sermon from the very beginning, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Antonio says, someone told me that if anyone prays 40 days without missing any and pray in the first row, all his past sins are wept. Is this sahih? Yes, there is an authentic hadith where the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, whoever prays in congregation for 40 days, 200 prayers, 40 days, without missing the first takbir, not necessarily in the first row, you can pray in the second, the third. The most important is that when you are in the row, the Imam says, Allahu Akbar, you say Allahu Akbar. You're not walking in. You're too late if you're walking in. You have to be in the position to say Allahu Akbar immediately afterwards. Whoever does this, Allah will give him 2 certificates of innocence from hypocrisy and from hellfire. So this is an authentic hadith, and it's a great reward to try to accomplish. Kalthum says, if someone wakes up late and misses the prayer which was praying in an open area, but there is another Eid prayer going on in the masjid, can he pray there? Will it be valid? The answer is no. We mentioned last Monday that Eid prayer must be prayed and offered in an open place, and doing it in the masjid is an innovation, and it is not something that the Prophet had ever done, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is all the time we have until we meet next Monday. I leave you fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.